Hello, everybody who is listening to me. Uh, Today, I'm going to read something from my writing on my blog. I write on my blog every day, and I was considering that if you hear me read what I have written, and perhaps you will also read yourself what I've written on my blog, then you have a real good grasp of the four parts of language, meaning speaking, listening, writing, and reading. And so this is very important because in my exploration of what I call embodied language, I have discovered something which is of crucial importance. And that is that we can be, of course, without language. And being without language is a beautiful experience. So, since we are conditioned by language, it is wonderful to be able to be out of that conditioning. And in this writing, I explain how that is possible. So the title of the writing is Without Language. I write about the real possibility that only with our embodied language we can say whatever we want to say, and after that we can be totally without any language. This is an entirely different matter from what we have been hearing from people who may have spoken endlessly about enlightenment, but who have never properly addressed the immense difference between our disembodied language, which is our usual group behavior, our common phony way of talking, which sets the stage for how we deal with our language. So they have never addressed the difference between our disembodied language and our embodied language, which is the language of individualism, in which we happily say what we are capable of saying. From what should be considered the mortal enemies of language, we have all heard the crazy notion of watching our so-called mind or observing our own thoughts, which is better known as meditation. So I am in this writing, and I give you a little comment here on the side. I am letting you know that all these people who have been talking about enlightenment and about self-realization, or all these sages, all these gurus, all these people who presumably have seen the light, they have never properly addressed the difference between these two ways of talking, which I call embodied language and disembodied language. And just to give you a little explanation about what is disembodied language, simply stated, disembodied language is the language in which a speaker is not listening to him or herself. So in disembodied language, the speaker speaks but is busy trying to get other people to listen to him or to her. And because of that, they are not paying attention to how they sound themselves. And so in disembodied language, the listener is also always listening to another speaker, but not to himself. And so the whole issue of listening in disembodied language is about listening to somebody else. It is never about listening to yourself. In embodied language, we still talk with other people and we still also listen to other people, but we listen to speakers in embodied language who listen to themselves. When you hear me speak, so right now, I'm listening to myself. You are now listening to a speaker who listens to himself. Yeah? So there's a huge difference between these two different ways of talking, which then these ways of talking set the stage for how we deal with our language. And how we deal with our language sets the stage for all our other behavior. So there is a lot to this. Let's go into this. And so my first point that I'm making here in this first paragraph is therefore that it has nothing to do with meditation. What people have been talking about meditation, no, it has to do with the way we deal with our language. Yeah, and the people who have been talking about meditation, they have always been against language. Yeah, they are the mortal enemies of language. I'm not. I am in favor of language, and I believe that we haven't really gotten to the real issue of our language yet. Okay. As I have often stated in my previous writings, there is absolutely no language anywhere inside of us. And any reference about supposedly quietly observing our mind or our thoughts or our inner speech or private speech, it is only adding more complications to our already existing, profoundly troublesome inner language fantasy. Actually, it involves our self-defeating, self-imposed notion of the limitation, yes, the outright taboo of talking about who we really are, which requires us, of course, first to stop our disembodied language. Now let's unpack this a little bit here. I've said in my previous writing that there is no language inside of us. Anybody who has only the most basic knowledge about neuroscience, neuroscience dealing with the parts of your brain, your occipital lobe, your parietal lobe, your occipital lobe in the back, the frontal lobes here, the parietal lobes. These different parts of your brain obviously deal with different aspects of our behavior. And if a part of our brain is damaged or hurt, then certain behaviors will change because our brain is damaged. However, that is true. Yeah, these brains, they have neurons inside, millions of neurons, neurotransmitters, serotonin, acetylcholine, different neurotransmitters, stress hormones, dopamine. There are different neuronal responses, different neurotransmitters are being released in our nervous system due to the interaction of our body with our environment. Yeah. And so the brain does what it does. But, and this is my point, there are no words anywhere inside of us. There really are no words inside of us. There is no language in our brain. Everybody should understand this, acknowledge this, and talk about this. And yet this is not happening. We keep hearing and we keep reading that we are thinking, that we are having thoughts, that we must use our mind, that we must think. But there is no thinking going on inside our brain. That is just the way we talk. That is the way we talk about what we believe is happening in our brain. But Our brain does not talk. Our brain doesn't have language. So there is actually no mind. What we say is our mind is just a product that derives from our disembodied language, the language in which we do not listen to ourselves, and the language in which therefore we cannot really speak about what we would be able to speak about if we would listen to ourselves. So, disembodied language sets the stage for the fantasy that we have thoughts, for the fantasy, the imagination that we have inner speech. There is no such thing. And once we got that clear, then we are no longer creating unnecessary complication, because once we talk about this inner presumed phenomenon of, I don't know, who we are, an inner self, a behavioral or regulating inner being of some sort, an inner agent who directs us, there's no such thing. It does not exist. Everybody ought to know this, and yet we need the embodied language to be able to assert this and to say this and to agree on this. And then we can begin to reason from what it means that language is always overt, which means you can hear it, you can say it, you can write it, and you can read it. That is what language is all about. Language is therefore always outside of us. It is never in us. And so once we recognize that language is always outside of us, we are no longer trapped in the delusion that we have thoughts, in the delusion that we have an inner conversation with ourselves or with a higher power. We have all kinds of fantasies which are absolutely out of touch with the reality. With our language, with our embodied language, in which we listen to ourselves, we are going to be able to say things that we were actually always able to say, but which we couldn't say because we were never stimulated to listen to ourselves while we speak. And so, of course, I write this because I just want to clarify it for myself. I write this to myself, basically, and hardly anybody reads it. It doesn't matter. I enjoy writing this. I enjoy clarifying it. And I also have discovered that I can say so much more when I listen to myself. Everybody can say so much more. I'm a former psychology instructor, and I've also worked many years in mental health. I've studied psychology, and I want to let you know that the people who I have talked about, the people who I've talked with, the people who I've taught, and the people that have been in my care, they have always responded very beautifully to this embodied language. The embodied language, which I should say, is missing everywhere. The fact of the matter is, we are almost permanently involved in disembodied language in which we do not listen to ourselves. So once we listen to ourselves, we step out of this taboo of not being able to speak about who we really are. And we can speak about who we really are by recognizing that language is outside of us. Language is expressed by us. Language is heard by us. Language is written by us and read by us. Okay, that's the second paragraph. It's a long piece, so just sit back and enjoy. So after we have together, to our heart's content, finally engaged in the embodied language, and therefore we have agreed and we have enjoyed our own embodied language and the embodied language of somebody else, then after we've done that, then we have had so much embodied language. We have really felt nourished. We have really felt delighted. And then we are without language because we have said what we wanted to say and what we were capable of saying. Now, this is such an extraordinary experience, which will change us forever. Yeah, I have a very good friend in the Netherlands. Her name is Annemiek, and I have weekly conversations with her about this. And our conversations are constantly leaving us in awe. Why? It is because we have ongoing embodied language with each other and with ourselves. And in doing so, we experience our language enlightenment. Yeah. So we express who we really are. Yeah. And so it is a marvelous phenomenon to become familiar with. And it is such a relief that this is possible and that it sort of just counteracts so many of the problems we have had and we continue to have because of our disembodied language. The point in this second paragraph is that after we have had embodied language, it is impossible to miss. We are without language. It is such a beautiful phenomenon to just be without any language. And yes, there are no thoughts. There's no mind. All of that was just a product of our disembodied language. So we have stumbled upon a truth which was completely unknown to us as long as we still engaged in disembodied language and weren't, due to our idiotic way of dealing with language, able to reason clearly. So this is another aspect about embodied language. With embodied language, we are able to reason clearly. We are following our own reasoning. We are saying to ourselves what is going on according to us. With disembodied language, we cannot do that. With disembodied language, we are bound to reason in such a way that we disparage our own experience. In other words, reasoning in disembodied language basically sets us up for failure because it disconnects us from who we are. Our reasoning with embodied language connects us with who we are. Yeah? Okay. So embodied language is a logical, coherent, and pragmatic way of dealing with language, which hasn't got anything to do with what we with disembodied language call thinking. So this is so crucially important, folks, that the logic that we're talking about, the coherence, the pragmatism of embodied language has nothing to do with what we previously referred to as thinking. No, it has to do with what we say. It has to do with what we really actually can hear. It has to do what we read, what we understand, and what we write. Yeah? And so that understanding, how does that understanding show? That's not some inner process. No, that understanding shows by what we say. That understanding shows by what we can put out, what we can reiterate, what we can produce, yeah, by what we can write, yeah, And then other people can read it, other people can understand it, other people can hear it. Yeah. And so this listening is understanding. There's nothing what stands in the way. No, there's no process inside of us that stands in the way. Yeah. We're not absent-minded. We're immediately understanding what a speaker says. We're experiencing actually what a speaker says. It is so beautiful. So, surely, in embodied language, we are speaking, writing, listening, and reading, as there is no other way for us to be busy with language than with these 4 behaviors. Now, stated differently, embodied language is somewhat like algebra. Algebra, which is a type of math that deals with solving problems with numbers and variables, which are symbols that represent unknown and known or changing quantities. Yeah. So algebra is just another language, just like chemistry is a language. Yeah. There's different languages that have different disciplines in science have different languages, basically, because they have their own terminology and all that kind of stuff. So, but algebra is very specific. It is the language of science, yeah? We use equations, formulas to sort of really put things succinctly. And so algebra is based on applying generalized rules and formulas to manipulate equations and expressions. Yeah. So algebraic fractions. Yeah. A fraction. I'm going to show you in a little bit. A fraction. They can be added and they can be subtracted and multiplied and divided in the same way that we use simple arithmetic. So you can minus, plus, divide, multiply, all these kind of things. And here I got a picture here for you, which I want to show at this point. So what you see here is, this is a fraction, yeah? A fraction is something that is on top of a line and something that is below the line. And what is on top is called the numerator, and what is on the bottom is called the denominator. And so when the numerator and the denominator are the same, 1 divided by 1, because that sign in the middle means divided by, 1 divided by 1 is 1. So if the numerator and the denominator are the same, then it means 1. So 1 divided by 1 is the same, is 1. A divided by A is 1. Yeah? 10 divided by 10 is 1. And here 50x divided by 50x is also 1. Now, this is where we're heading, folks. You have your own experience as an individual. Not as a member of a group, no, as an individual, as an autonomous human being. You have your own experience. And that experience can only accurately be described by your embodied language. It cannot be accurately described as it is by your disembodied language. So there's only a similarity between your experience and your language with embodied language. There's only a match, if you would like to say it like that, between your experience and your language with embodied language. So what that means is, if your experience stays intact because of your language, if your language addresses your experience appropriately, correctly, accurately, you experience oneness. You are one. You are one with your language. You are one with your experience. And you are without language. And you are without experience. This oneness totally absorbs you. Yeah. And that is the beautiful experience of what I call language LE, language enlightenment. So, your experience divided by your embodied language is your oneness, and that oneness is your language enlightenment. Your language enlightenment, LE, in which you go beyond experience and beyond language. Now, it requires, of course, a little bit more explanation, a little bit more familiarity with what we are talking about. So let's just start with these fractions, okay? And just stay with this very simple fraction, 1 over 1, because that is as simple as can be, right? 1 divided by 1 is 1. And so when the top is the same as the bottom, when the numerator is the same as the denominator, you get it. Then we have 1. And so when you talk about fractions, you are also talking about parts of a whole. So if you take a pizza, here I draw a pizza, okay? Wait, hold on. Yeah? Just a second here. Now, if you see this pizza here, yeah, a fraction is a part of a whole. So this is a pizza. This is half a pizza. Yeah, approximately. And here you see a pizza divided in quarters. This is a quarter of a pizza. So a fraction is always a part of a whole. And if you put all these fractions, if you put 2 halves together, you get a whole. Yeah. Here, if you put these 4 parts together, you get a whole. Yes, do you see that? So that's what we're talking about, putting all the parts together. And that's what language, embodied language, of course, does. Yeah? Everything has its place. So fractions are algebraic language with expressions on the top and on the bottom. Also, fractions are always expressions of parts of a whole. An example of a fraction is half of a pizza, a quarter of a pizza. So a fraction is named according to the number of equal parts the whole or the collection of the parts is divided into. Yeah, I just showed you. So we do not need to go further into this. I mean, I wrote a little bit more about it, but you can read it later. So the oneness, yeah, the completeness of this pizza, the oneness of these aforementioned fractions was determined by the fact that the numerator, the number on top, is the same as the denominator, the number on the bottom. Now, I have already done so, but in my writing I write, now I introduce you the fraction of the oneness of our embodied language, which is above the line, and that is our experience, which we will call x. Yeah, so that is what you do. Yeah, you replace certain things in algebra with letters or with, x and y and so forth. So you call your experience x, and this is why I wrote here, yeah, experience abbreviated x, right? Experience, you see that here? Experience abbreviated x, yeah. So you divide x by embodied language, and that is 1. Then, when you experience x is described correctly with your embodied language, you are also conscious. So this whole issue of consciousness is a matter of language. You understand. You understand yourself with your language. You will experience then, and that's what this equation is, yeah, this bottom equation. Your experience divided by embodied language is oneness, is language enlightenment. So then you experience your language enlightenment once your embodied language articulates your own experience finally correctly. The experience which can only be addressed correctly if you are in touch with yourself, if you stay in touch with yourself while you speak, by listening to yourself while you speak. And then we go to another paragraph. In order to be without language, one first has to be conscious about and therefore effective with one's own language. That is, one's language must be the proper expression of one's own experience. And this is precisely what we do in embodied language. Furthermore, it is so exquisite to have nothing to say anymore. And yet, to still talk and hear and feel and experience what that oneness sounds like. So you can still, even though you become quiet, you can still talk. You can still create new experiences by telling yourself, what is this like? To put an experience to this, to put words to this. One then only talks, but it isn't about anything in particular. And one produces words and sentences to be able to hear the nothingness that is beyond words. That is possible. And we have done it. I have done it. I do it right now. You can, if you really listen to me, if you just pay attention what I'm saying, you can experience in this moment with me the nothingness which is beyond language. As I have just properly addressed how that comes about. So what it is like to be without language can be said, and really needs to be said, because if it isn't said, one will not be at peace. Something has remained incomplete, and this too can be heard in the restlessness of the sound of one's own voice. Yes, you just continue to speak about everything you are capable of, and even when you believe to be done, you can still add some more and have nothing to say, or simply try to say something just for the sake of saying it. And you dare to say it, you may say it, yeah, and you can try again to say it better than you said it before, until it totally pleases you, and until you feel this sense of gratefulness, this sense of relief, this sense of well-being that comes by being able to say what you really, really, truly wanted to say. You can't miss it. And if you don't have this experience, you simply haven't continued with it long enough. Not trying harder, perhaps it is more a matter of not trying so hard. It's more a matter of allowing yourself to hear what you say, to feel what you say. So you explore if there is more for you to say, and you make sure that you haven't forgotten anything. And if there's still something bothering you, if there's still something that is demanding your attention, or if there's something that is worrying you, or something that is keeping your attention, holding your attention, you just express it. And whatever is holding your attention, you give it attention with your language, you describe it, and then you will find it just dissolves. And you experience this nothingness, which is beyond language. It is marvelous. So you will know when you have said what you had wanted to say, and what you were actually always already capable of saying. With disembodied language, however, you didn't have the chance to say it. In disembodied language, we're always arguing. We're always fighting who is getting the attention, who is right. We are always having a discussion. It is always a battle to keep each other's attention, to force the listener to listen. It is just such a mess. That's the language we are used to. It's unbelievable that we haven't taken care of this yet after 2,000 years of trouble. But the time is right for us to get to this. So with disembodied language, we didn't have the chance to say what we were actually capable of saying. And consequently, we are, inadvertently fantasizing about wanting to say that. And then we get this whole notion of inner speech. It doesn't happen like that, but we fantasize about that. That is what we call thinking. That is what we call private speech. Yeah, or negative private speech, of course, because it's always negative. Yeah, because we cannot say what we want to say. Yeah. You never, yeah, with embodied language, you finally sit by yourself, as I'm doing right now, because I'm just sitting here by myself. There's nobody here, just me. And if I allow myself to have embodied language on my own, then I'm finally giving myself the opportunity to say what I want to say. And when you just step away from your conversation with others and simply give yourself that opportunity, by allowing yourself, giving yourself the permission to acknowledge that this is more important than talking with others, yeah, then it will happen. You will hear your embodied language and you will notice that you will say very different things to yourself, which you weren't able to say to others. You realize with embodied language, you are able to say so much more. It is the language that creates space. You say so much more than you believed with your disembodied language that you could say. And your so-called thoughts about what you could say, they weren't true. They were just simply imaginations. They were fears about being judged, about what you had actually always wanted to say. In embodied language, there is no fear. And when you say that to yourself, you suddenly realize like, oh, wow, I'm giving myself a present. I'm doing myself such an enormous favor to give myself the permission to speak without fear to myself. And this is why both your experience described by your embodied language as well as your embodied language itself, it just dissolves in your language enlightenment. Indeed, in language enlightenment, you are not only without words, but also without any experience. This tranquility is unlike anything you have ever experienced. And as you can tell, I go back again to that word experience, even though I'm saying it's not an experience. But hang in there, we're getting there. I say that language enlightenment is not an experience because there are no words to describe this. There really are no words. No matter how many words we keep adding to it, it doesn't matter. And you can keep doing that, it doesn't matter. Of course, you can always try if you would be so inclined. Yeah, perhaps there's still something more to experience or to say. But even if that may be true, eventually you come to the same point that I'm describing. In your language enlightenment, everything merges into this mysterious sense of oneness. And it has nothing to do with inner peace. It has nothing to, no, it has to do with the fact that you have said what you were able to say. And you can call it whatever you like. Truth, love, consciousness, these words don't matter. People with disembodied language, they always say that words really matter. But with embodied language, you find out they don't. You can say it feels good, you feel relaxed, you feel happy, you feel blissful. Yeah, but these words are irrelevant because with embodied language, you actually always leave your language behind. And that's because you keep evolving, you keep unfolding in your language. And you always leave your language behind. Even though you may use the same language, you use it differently every moment. You are actually new every moment. It is such a beautiful experience. So by being without language, yeah, your being without language is made possible because you have used your language correctly. And you're being stuck with language, you believe you're stuck in your mind, you're stuck in your thinking, or you're distracted, that is absent-minded, whatever. You have all these terms to refer to the fact that you're not thinking straight, yeah, you're not logical, you're not in the here and now, you're disconnected from where you are. But you have not used your language correctly. And that's what this is about. It may help to compare your embodied language and your disembodied language also with what it is like to be asleep, in the sense that in sleep you ideally leave behind your your language and your experiences. However, we all know that we still dream about all sorts of stuff, because in the day we are used to engaging in disembodied language. So the language that we use every day actually has a negative impact on our ability to sleep. Perhaps insomnia can be cured with embodied language. I have strong suspicion that is the case. So in the dream, we do actually the same as we do during the day, because our presumed thinking is nothing but a daydream. It occurs because we don't have the right language for our experience, and consequently we have, in our disembodied language, we always are left with unattended experiences that were not expressed, experiences that didn't get our attention. How could our experience get the attention if it wasn't for the fact that we addressed it? Yeah, we can go running and we can do yoga and we can dance and we can do all sorts of things to deal with our experience, right? We can I don't know, fight it out, punch a pillow or something like that, or we can get into a real fight. Yeah, and we do so all these things. But our language is such that it is not adjusted to our experience, and so language-wise, there's always a mismatch, a discrepancy between what we say and how we say it. And consequently, yeah, there is a problem. There is a problem because that experience remains unattended with our language, and consequently, that illusion of thought, yeah, of having a mind and of having all sorts of mental health problems, because that's all part of this, yeah, is the result of our inaccurate use of language. Isn't it something? So people believe they can be conscious about their own experience. Oh yeah, I'm aware. People practice meditation. People practice, mindfulness. Yeah, all this total nonsense. Total nonsense. Everybody is wasting their time, their lives, their energy on all this nonsense. They believe they can be conscious about their own experience, but what does that entail? As you have just heard me, being conscious about our experience is about having ongoing embodied language. Not just a moment, no. Skillful, deliberate, ongoing embodied language about ourselves. Meaning we as individuals are important. How would we have embodied language about ourselves if we weren't important? We don't have it because we are still having all kinds of notions about ourselves as if something is wrong with us. And we have been traumatized basically by our disembodied language, in which we could never truly be ourselves. So this is a huge issue. Once mankind is stepping away from all its evolutionary group behavior, because we have always existed in groups, survived in groups, but societies have evolved and we have gotten individual rights, and we have gradually, haphazardly stepped away from all this group behavior, where the foundational principles here in the United States are based on individualism. Yeah, but we do not yet have the embodied language that is crucially important to match with the experience of the individual. So, without embodied language, with disembodied language, we only act out of our conditioning history, but not out of our experience right now. And so There's always something lacking. Something is always troubling us. Something is unclear, as there's no match between our language and our experience. You will never be without language and still and resolved about your own experiences as long as you remain unexpressed in your own language, in your own embodied language. And as long as you keep expressing yourself inadequately, frustrated, anxious, fearful, stressed out, full of despair with your disembodied language, which is always negative. If you verify with your own embodied language whether what I say is true, if you really try to do that, you will again and again find out that your disembodied language, your conditioning history, it takes over. And as long as that continues to be the case, your language will reflect again your struggle, your conflict, your trouble, your problems, and your experience will still be negative because you feel something is missing, something is wrong, something is bothering you. Your disembodied language has to stop. And then, only then, can you express everything effortlessly with your embodied language. So, yeah, even if you manage to just do it for a moment, just a little bit, give it a try, you already instantly experience these positive effects. Now, how do these positive effects continue? These effects will accumulate and they will reveal your language enlightenment, which transcends your language. But the point of this paragraph is very important, that you have to recognize that all this negativity that I was just describing is part of your disembodied language. And unless you can recognize it as such, that all your stress, all your fear, all your anxiety, all your worry, all your problems, it deals with disembodied language. And now you have a category. You just place it in that category. You just say, oh, that is caused by, maintained by, elicited by, because it again and again it gets triggered. We're constantly triggered by our disembodied language. Yeah, we upset each other, we stress each other out, but we also do that to ourselves. Of course, primarily we do this to ourselves. Yeah, and so we get aroused, we get upset, we get stressed out, we get nervous. If we listen to ourselves, we say, oh, wait a second, I was getting all carried away by what I was saying. I was not listening to myself. Oh, yeah. Oh, what a relief. Here you go again. You go again into your relaxation. Here, this is my embodied language. Yeah. It is so wonderful that we can do this. We can do this on our own. And if we have done it multiple times, enough times, we can sit together and we can both share this experience of what we have done. And we can say like, yeah, we can do that together. We can stimulate each other to listen to ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. This is not a judgment. We can actually acknowledge the fact that we've both been conditioned by conditioning that has taught us disembodied language, from which we can only recover if we actually begin to use these rare moments in which we have embodied language to reinforce each other, to have more embodied language rather than less. I have been doing this with my dear friend Annemiek, and of course I also have this with my wife. You know, I'm happily married with my wife, although I do not talk about this as much with her as I do with Annemiek, because with Annemiek specifically we have really explored our own language enlightenment, which is the way in which we move out of our language, beyond our language, and beyond our experience. Oh, I'm at the end of this reading. I didn't even realize that this was the last paragraph. Just for a moment, be without language with me.